Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
This story began ordinary. It was one of the commonplace events that occurred at the city hospital several times a day. An ambulance brought an unknown man to the emergency room. The middle-aged man, beaten and unconscious, was discovered in the city park. A compassionate man, who found the victim in such a condition, helped him. Initially, both he and the arriving doctors thought it was just a drunk person lying there, but no. The man didn't smell of alcohol, and by all factors, it seemed like he had been seriously assaulted. Under the hat on his head, they discovered a large hematoma. It seemed like he had been beaten deliberately, with the intention, if not to kill, then to maim. The victim didn't have any valuable items or documents on him, of course. Maybe he left without them, or perhaps those who tried to harm him took them. Regarding his belongings, nothing definite could be said either. The man was wearing sportswear, sneakers, and a cap as if he was going for a run. The items were not exclusive or designer, of course, but quite decent and not from the cheapest brands. However, the problem was that the clothes were in terrible condition, torn, stained, and emanating an impressive odor, and it remained only to guess whether the clothes suffered along with their owner or if the man put them on already in such a state. The hospital attendants, of course, speculated, shared their opinions with the ambulance crew, and then forgot about it. After all, there would be more difficult patients with bruises and wounds for today's shift. They undressed, washed, and disinfected them just in case, and told them to dress in government-issued clothing. The doctors did what was necessary to keep him alive and placed him in a huge ward. Of course, no one pampered the new patient. That's how our stern medicine worked, no luxuries or fuss. First aid was provided. If a person wasn't dying, they just should have had a rest. The entire surge of attention lasted about 10 minutes, or maybe less. After that, the unknown man found himself alone in a crowded ward. The neighbors were entirely diverse, from individuals without a fixed place of residence to some office workers who either couldn't or didn't want to afford a private room. The unknown man came to his senses, but his situation in terms of personal identification, unfortunately, did not simplify. A serious head injury induced retrograde amnesia. The case was very typical. Usually, with medical stabilization, a patient loses memory temporarily preceding the injury. But, as a rule, a patient in such a situation behaves extremely nervously. The natural reaction of any person to the unknown is fear. Fear gives rise to many other undesirable and unfriendly behavioral traits. But this was not the case for this specific man. On the contrary, he somehow pulled himself together, tried not to cause a commotion or disturb anyone, and strictly followed all the prescriptions of doctors and nurses. That's why Dorota liked him. She was the nurse in the male ward of this department. The man was remarkably intelligent. This was reflected in his manner of communication and in the way he expressed his thoughts. Dorota had heard all sorts of things from some patients. Sometimes, after their tirades, she felt an immediate need to wash herself. And now I'm not just talking about words. Some particularly actively recovering male individuals didn't limit themselves to verbal communication. They wanted to demonstrate their full recovery through action and, at the same time, assert themselves. Men don't know how to be sick at all. Sickness and lack of energy throw them into a panic and instill fear. Hence the nasty behavior. In general, the unknown man with amnesia and an unknown biography greatly endeared himself to Dorota. Since the man was paralyzed, he constantly needed her assistance. She genuinely sympathized with him, showed him concern, and showed various kinds of compassion. She would pop into his room a few extra times to exchange a few words, joke, smile, encourage, and say that everything would soon be fine and that his memory would return to normal soon, so the man shouldn't have been in despair. She said there was hope that he would stand on his feet. Several times, she even brought the patient homemade food she had prepared herself, just to treat him out of pure kindness, without expecting praise or any gratitude. Deep down, Dorota was very concerned about what would happen to the patient when it came time for discharge and if the amnesia didn't pass. But it didn't happen. One day, during her shift, Dorotea suddenly noticed some commotion in the department. This usually happened when the hospital management was preparing for an inspection or when an important guest was expected. They didn't seem to warn us about this, the attendant thought to herself before going back to her duties. She had plenty of her tasks. Only by lunchtime did she learn the reason for the unprecedented chaos. Nurses chatted and gossiped over lunch coffee. The identity of the unknown patient with retrograde amnesia from the 10th ward was established. It turned out to be none other than Rogelio Blanco, a businessman and owner of a city-forming enterprise. Everyone in the city knew him. The medical staff gossiped among themselves. How did it happen that no one recognized him? The most skeptical ones asked. How do you recognize someone when their face is a mess? There are several fractures, and his face is swollen. Even his mother wouldn't recognize him. Indeed, that was the case. The attackers who assaulted him had made an effort. The injuries were serious, including significant damage to the face. Dorotea, hearing all this, was in shock. She hadn't expected such a turn of events and now felt a little embarrassed about her sympathy and similar attitude towards the well-known businessman. Of course, when the identity was established, a crowd of people flocked to the hospital immediately. Before that, the unknown man had only one visitor, the local police officer, who wrote half a page of the protocol and left. Now, Rogelio's wife, almost his entire security service, and all law enforcement officers in the city had gathered here. Everyone was present, starting from the police to the prosecutor's office. It turned out that Rogelio Blanco had been attacked in the park during his morning jogging. During the 5 days he spent incognito in the hospital, his family and the police were frantically searching for him. The case was complicated by the fact that on that night, Rogelio stayed not in the countryside house where he usually lived with his wife, but in a city apartment. No one knew he had gone for a run. Unfortunately, surveillance cameras malfunctioned that day due to a power outage. In short, everything fell into place. Naturally, Rogelio was immediately transferred to a more comfortable place, away from others. The hospital found the best single room for him. Susana Blanco, Rogelio's wife, insisted on transferring him from the city hospital to the best private clinic in the city, or even to the capital. However, the patient firmly said no and categorically refused to move anywhere. Immediately, all the top doctors flocked around him. Department heads gathered to offer assistance in their respective fields. Even the medical nurses bombarded him with attention and care. Of course, the chief doctor also appeared. As soon as he arrived at work and learned about what had happened, he promptly found himself in the room of this particularly important patient. Rogelio, what requests or wishes do you have? Can we help you in any way? Maybe you want something specific? Leoncio Carrasco, the hospital's chief doctor, was trying to be helpful as much as he could. It turned out that there was a request, and it was extremely unusual. Can you temporarily assign the nurse from my former ward, Dorotea, to me during my stay here? The businessman asked. The chief doctor was surprised. He could not have imagined he would ask for such a request. Of course, we will do everything possible, he promised, and he immediately left to fulfill the patient's wish. First, it was necessary to find out who this nurse was. Of course, Leoncio didn't know anything about Dorotea. He had to go to the medical staff and ask about it. In general, it was quite curious to know who this attendant was and why Rogelio was requesting her. The information was easy to obtain. Nurses in the break room gladly and eagerly shared the details with the chief doctor. They explained that Dorotea had been paying a lot of attention to the unknown patient, visiting him frequently, and even feeding him. To be honest, based on the chief doctor's description, he expected to see a compassionate older woman. Imagine his surprise when Dorotea turned out to be a young woman, barely over 30. Dorotea, he addressed her. Yes? The woman responded. She almost squealed in surprise when she turned around upon hearing his voice. She did not expect to see the chief doctor before her and couldn't fathom how he knew her name, which, of course, was true, he had just found out. The woman was frightened by the increased attention from the hospital management, who knew what might be happening. It's just, the man unexpectedly hesitated. It was surprising even for him. He had pictured the nurse quite differently and had prepared the speech for a completely different person. Are you aware that the unknown, paralyzed patient from the 10th ward with amnesia is Rogelio Blanco? He asked. Yes, just found out. The girls told me, she replied. So, he mentioned that you treated him wonderfully and kindly when you didn't know who he was. Firstly, on behalf of the hospital, I want to express my gratitude for this commendable behavior. Don't worry, it's not just verbal appreciation. I will personally ensure that you receive a monetary reward. Secondly, Rogelio Blanco wants you to be his nurse during his hospital stay. Of course, there will be additional compensation for this. What do you say? And what could Dorota say? After her husband left her with 2 toddlers 6 months ago, every penny mattered. Why not? The only thing that troubled her was whether she had the competence for it. Dorota never completed nursing school. First, there was an academic leave with the first child, then with the second. Sure, I agree. Excuse me, Leoncio, but am I sure I can handle it? I'm not a nurse, she decided to clarify. Don't worry. Your position will be purely nominal, just to assist the patient with everything. A nurse and an on-duty doctor will be constantly available, so don't worry, Leoncio reassured her. Then I don't have any questions, Dorota smiled. With that, the conversation ended. From this moment on, the nurse was free of her usual duties and was supposed to be at the patient's disposal. It felt awkward and unusual for her, but she found joy in it. They immediately found a common language, chatted, and joked without any hindrance between them. Now, the attendant didn't know how to behave. The same as before? It seemed awkward, an important man used to everyone bowing down to him. Should she have tried to be more respectful and changed her manner of behavior? He might see it as flattery and sycophancy. Both options didn't suit her. With these thoughts, Dorota approached the ward. All visitors had already dispersed, and Rogelio was resting alone, watching TV. May I? The attendant nurse. Oh, Dorota, hello again. See how everything has changed since our morning meeting? The man smiled and gestured to the changed surroundings. Yes, unexpectedly. Forgive me, but I'd rather ask and not get lost in guesses. Would you like a more respectful attitude from me, or can we leave everything as it is? Sorry, I'm afraid to cross the line into familiarity, but I also fear overdoing it with flattery. I think there's already an excess of that. Dorota awkwardly smiled and awaited a response. Oh, God, of course I want everything to stay the same. Don't even think about it, Dorota. I'm not demanding or asking, and I don't even expect any special treatment from you. Of course, I asked you to be my nurse because you treated me wonderfully before, Rogelio smiled warmly. And your soup and cheesecakes, I will be forever grateful for them. Don't worry. I can bring them every day, it's not difficult for me, the woman laughed in response. So they began to coexist together. They enjoyed each other's company and had fun. Slowly, Rogelio started to regain his memory. Not abruptly, like in a movie with a snap of fingers and a wave of a magic wand, but progress was evident. Fortunately, now he was being treated by the best specialists in the field. There was some progress with mobility as well. They said the case wasn't hopeless. The spine suffered serious damage, and Rogelio wouldn't be able to run anymore, but it was possible for him to walk again. For Dorota, going to work felt like a real celebration. In reality, her job now consisted of communicating with a person she found pleasant. Wasn't it a miracle? Moreover, she was paid well, 3 times more than she received before, and it was all official through the hospital. The only thing Dorota didn't like was Rogelio's wife, Susanna. When she came, the atmosphere in the room seemed to electrify. She barely concealed her disdain for the nurse, treating her like a third-rate person. The look was full of disgust. Dorotea had no illusions. She understood that if Rogelio weren't a businessman, Susanna would have long started openly humiliating her, not holding back in expressions. Luckily, Susanna didn't visit often and didn't stay for long. It seemed that Rogelio's wife did it more for formality, as it was expected, than out of great love for her husband. That's how it appeared from the outside. Dorotea didn't delve into deeper matters and had no intention to. She had enough of her own problems. Clearly, Rogelio was a man who could stand up for himself and didn't need defense, even in his current state. In general, excluding his wife's visits, they spent their time wonderfully. Dorotea read books to Rogelio, they played board games, discussed various topics, and joked. The attendant took her charge for a walk regularly. A serious spinal injury prevented him from walking at the moment, but fresh air was essential for both, so Dorotea wheeled Rogelio out in a wheelchair for a stroll every day. Initially, he resisted strongly. It must have been awkward and embarrassing for him due to his helplessness. Still, Dorotea turned everything into a joke, preserving the man's self-esteem. Rogelio was often lazy and tried to refuse various exercises, massages, or therapeutic activities. Masseurs, rehabilitation specialists, and many other experts attended to him. Dorotea did everything to encourage and motivate him. Rogelio, stop being capricious. I understand that it hurts, but you have to work on yourself. What do the doctors say? If you don't take care of yourself, you'll miss the moment, and some functions may never recover. Don't you want to walk? Dorotea complained, looking at him sternly. Dorotea, you are too harsh and demanding. You act like my late mother in my distant childhood, the man smiled, trying to charm her. Well, I am a mother. I regularly scold my little ones and make them do something. In my perception, you boys don't change from diapers to old age, Dorotea replied. Oh, come on. I understand everything, really, but it hurts so much. It will keep hurting. Doctors say you need to engage in activities despite the pain, otherwise, it will never pass. Do you remember what that expert who came 4 days ago said? The crisis hasn't passed. You get so many pills, injections, and medications every day. We need to immediately reduce the dosage and give the body time to recover, Dorotea said. She didn't want to be tedious herself, but what else could she do in such a situation? It somehow helped and made the man pull himself together. All right. You'll talk a dead man into it. Call this Porfirio Dado. But when he makes me feel pain, remember, I'll blame you. Rogelio tried to cheer himself up, although it was evident that this decision was made through force, purely on moral and volitional grounds. Dorotea smiled, even though it was difficult for her. She felt incredibly sorry for the man. She saw his pain and suffering. Honestly, the words of that metropolitan doctor had scared her seriously, just like Rogelio. Dorotea clearly saw it in his eyes. They were both sure that all life-threatening dangers were already behind them and that now the issue was about the quality of life going forward and a struggle to restore all functions lost so far. Still, the invited specialist didn't hide the fact that the internal organ ruptures turned out to be too serious. Judging by the medical chart and the conversation with the surgeon who performed the abdominal operation, everything was not perfect. No one delved into all the intricacies and details that neither the patient nor his attendant would understand due to the lack of a specialized education, but the hint was clear: the future was uncertain. The condition was currently stable, but it was too early to talk about forecasts. It was necessary to monitor Rogelio's condition dynamically and see how the body recovered. The patient suffered greatly during the attack. Who attacked him was still a mystery. Despite the efforts of the police and the security service, the reasons and goals of the attack were still unknown, as were the identities of the criminals. Whether it was an attempted murder disguised as a regular robbery, a GOP stop, as it is called in professional jargon, or a real aggressive attack aimed at taking valuable items from the victim, the nature of the attack did not clearly indicate anything. Perhaps it was a targeted destruction of the victim's body, or maybe the criminals, in their malice and aggression, simply crossed the line, so all scenarios were considered, even criminal attacks. All versions needed to be worked out, nothing could be overlooked. Rogelio didn't talk to Dorota about this, but his anxiety was evident. Of course, he was worried not only about his life, but also about his health. He wanted to know exactly who attacked him and, most importantly, the attacker's motives. Everything could be very, very serious. Now he was lucky, though you wouldn't say so by looking at the almost bedridden patient. However, it was unprecedented luck. Everything could have been much worse. Both the patient and his attendant were well aware of this, but didn't dare to start a conversation with each other on this topic yet. It was too painful. Every day, from morning till night, Dorota spent time with the businessman. She genuinely put her soul into helping him recover, encouraging him to want to live again. It was incredibly challenging for her, both physically and morally. While physical fatigue was understandable, the two aspects that particularly depressed her morally were how distant and uninterested Rogelio himself could be in his health and, most importantly for any mother, the sudden reduction in the amount of time spent with his children. Dorota struggled. She missed her boy so much, but told herself that she couldn't act differently now. If the situation unfolded so magically, she couldn't refuse the opportunity to earn money. She needed to save up, as children always involved significant expenses. Before the arrival of the new patient into her life, the single mother had a hard time financially. So, despite the joy of communicating with an interesting, knowledgeable, and educated person, despite the good earnings, Dorota still faced difficulties in life. Not everything was as wonderful and amazing as it might seem from the outside, but the healthcare worker was used to overcoming challenges, pushing herself forward, processing depressive states, and even despair. As a mother, she was well aware that her children had no one else to rely on but her. Therefore, she had to be strong, happy, healthy, and cheerful, if not for herself, then at least for her boys. This had been going on for quite some time. Despite the patient's despondency and his apparent lack of desire to live and climb out of his situation, Dorota literally carried him on her shoulders. That evening was particularly difficult. The patient's wife came to visit. Although the healthcare worker left the room during her visit, upon returning, she realized that Rogelio's mood and condition had worsened. To be honest, the woman was internally infuriated. She was doing everything she could, and his own wife could at least not interfere if she couldn't find a way to help the patient. Therefore, Dorota had to stay a little longer to somehow stabilize the condition of her ward, cheer him up, chat, and make jokes. It was already very late. Naturally, Susanna had many privileges, including the right to visit at any time, ignoring the traditional visiting hours. It was around 11 p.m. when Dorota finally decided to go home. She chose to quietly pass through the back staircase, which was usually unused, and it worked to her advantage. Firstly, not to attract unnecessary attention to herself. And secondly, the exit was next to Rogelio's room. The healthcare worker slipped out and quietly locked the door behind her. She had already started descending when she heard voices and caught a whiff of cigarettes. Someone was smoking on the stairs, even though it was strictly prohibited. Dorota was about to go down to reprimand the violators when she suddenly froze. She clearly heard the voice of the hospital's chief doctor. Exactly. It was him. Leoncio was talking to someone. The woman, judging by her voice, seemed very nervous. Apparently, she was also smoking. The female voice seemed familiar, but at first, Dorota couldn't identify it. Only when she clearly heard the words spoken by the supposed stranger did everything fall into place instantly. "You have to help me. That son of a bitch will destroy you too if he survives," Susanna, Rogelio's wife, uttered. Dorota had no doubts. Susanna was talking to the chief doctor. "We've already discussed this," the doctor said calmly. "At the moment, I don't see any solutions to our problem. Any medication will be detected during the examination. It won't help us if Rogelio dies and we end up in trouble. You don't understand. Mrs. Blanco raised her voice. Quiet, speak softer, just in case. Although no one is around here, we need to behave carefully. If you want to shout, let's go to my office. You don't allow smoking there. Yes, and I remember, there's no need to explain twice why it's not allowed. Let's finish what we've started. More precisely, one specific nonsense. He shouldn't recover and leave here, understand? You'll also be in trouble, haven't you forgot? Dorotea couldn't hear the chief doctor's response. He started whispering. The healthcare worker broke into a sweat, absorbing the conversation. She desperately wanted to get out of here immediately. She was afraid they'd find her. On the other hand, the sound of a door opening might reveal her presence. There were just one flight of stairs below her. Besides, Dorotea wanted to hear the conversation to the end, if possible, and understand what plan the conspirators would come up with. Don't even try, Doctor, Susanna hissed, clearly interrupting him. Don't try to back off. You're not a fool. Do you understand that sooner or later, Rogelio will conclude that you're connected to me? With my payment, you didn't inform anyone about the unknown person who arrived. But for now, my guilt doesn't amount to a criminal offense, dear lady, unlike yours, he countered. What good are investigations and trials to you if Rogelio Blanco decides to destroy you? Have you thought about it? I'm sure that if he puts his hand to it to eliminate you, you'll be praying for prison. Fine, I understand. Judging by his tone, Leoncio was subdued. Rogelio's wife's arguments did make an impression on him. But I still repeat, I don't see options at the moment. We can do something, yes, but it won't save us. More likely, it'll make everything worse. Well, that's why I'm asking you. I'm telling you, you must come up with something. You're the one who understands forensics. Of course, we shouldn't act blindly. Leoncio, all this is not a joke. We either sink together or resurface together and live in luxury. It all depends on you and your ingenuity, Rogelio's wife pressed him, eager not to become a widow. Don't talk to me like this. God forbid, I'm explaining to you clearly what awaits us. As it turns out, you live in a world of illusions. So, I'm introducing you to real perspectives. I've already understood that, but fear doesn't mobilize me. I need to think. Go on, but we have little time. They fell silent. Dorotea had already thought they had left and was even ready to go to the exit herself and open the doors. What a stroke of luck that she hesitated. In the absolute silence that prevailed on the stairs, they would have heard her. Even breathing was difficult, and she had to do it as quietly as possible. A second before taking a step, Dorotea heard the click of a lighter. Susanna lit up again. So, the conversation wasn't over. They stood facing each other. The doctor was thinking while Rogelio's wife smoked, waiting for some decision or at least a suggestion. Dorotea was nervous. She felt that her pounding heart could be heard downstairs. The healthcare worker was extremely frightened. What do they do with an unnecessary witness to the conspiracy? The answer is one. Too much was at stake for them to spare the woman. Judging by their conversation, pity wasn't a trait of character for either of them. There's one option, the chief doctor said thoughtfully. Don't drag it out. We need to make it so that the patient urgently needs a repeat operation. Once there, I think I can come up with something unnoticed by the other members of the surgical team that won't surface in the forensic examination. Agreed. How do we make Rogelio need surgery? The woman inquired. Not so fast. I'm thinking of a better approach. Again, a short pause. Both suddenly fell silent. Dorotea found these pauses extremely difficult. Each time, she felt as if she were dying, her heart sinking to her heels. For some reason, it seemed like they heard her or detected the presence of an outsider. But Leoncio continued. I think this will work. Currently, the patient is on antibiotics precisely to prevent sepsis after the cavity operation. So, if we discontinue them, inflammation will inevitably begin. If you say it suits us, I have no reason not to trust you. I don't have a medical education. The only question is, can you organize everything quietly without attracting attention? If I couldn't, I would come up with another option, the chief doctor said. Excellent. So, let's proceed this way. Something suddenly rustled, an unpleasant sound. The healthcare worker was already prepared for the worst, but Susanna's voice rang out again. Here, take it. This is an advance. The second part after the issue is settled. She's taking money out of her bag, Dorothea guessed. She referred to her husband's death and his murder as the issue will be settled. Unbelievable. This woman is not human, she's an emotionless robot. The healthcare worker stood there, trying to comprehend everything she had heard. The conversation, of which she became an accidental witness, shook her to the core. Finally, the sounds of footsteps on the stone steps reached her. So, the couple was moving away. Precisely a few moments later, the sound of an opening door came, followed by the creak of a lock turning in the keyhole. This didn't convince Dorothea that it was safe to leave. It was terrifyingly frightening, so the woman decided to be extra cautious, silently descended the steps, and sat down. She tried to breathe deeply to calm herself. Out of horror, she even felt an intense wave of nausea and struggled to suppress it. Dorothea tried to detach herself and calmly assess the entire situation. Of course, she couldn't. Panic and fear for herself, her children, and her patient Rogelio only intensified. He was definitely in danger, and judging by what the healthcare worker overheard, the threat was almost inevitable. Then a thought struck the unfortunate woman like lightning. The attack on Rogelio in the park wasn't a coincidence either. His wife did it, she realized with horror. It seemed she wanted to get rid of her husband. She organized the first attempt, but the man turned out to be too strong, resilient, and compassionate. Passers-by promptly summoned help. Perhaps random strangers saved Rogelio's life, scaring off the attackers. After the patient was brought to the city hospital as an unidentified person, as Dorothea gathered from eavesdropping, Susanna paid the chief doctor. It turned out she wanted him not to be found immediately and for Rogelio Blanco to lie in the hospital as an unknown person. Apparently, the wife hoped for luck, that her plan would eventually succeed, and that her husband would pass away without quality and attentive medical care. Unfortunately for her, luck was not on her side. The doctors turned out to be decent people and did not let the man die, they provided quality medical assistance. When all of this came together in Dorothea's mind, things got even worse for her. What had Rogelio done to make his wife so ardently try to kill him? That it was all happening just for money didn't occur to the overly naive healthcare worker right away. The most pressing and terrifying question that now stood sharply before Dorothea was what to do next. What steps should she take? She was thrown off balance and utterly confused. Her brain suggested the most sensible idea for today, quoting the brilliant and undaunted optimist Scarlett O'Hara, "I won't think about it today. I'll think about it tomorrow." Dorothea decided that this was the right decision. Right now, she wanted to go home desperately, wash off this horrible dirt that had engulfed her, and hug her little boys, who had long been asleep. Having finally decided to postpone all decisions for a fresh mind, the healthcare worker stood up and walked towards the exit from the black staircase. She was sure that she would never use this emergency exit again, just to be on the safe side. Only when Dorothea finally reached home and closed the door to her apartment could she exhale. Fortunately, the children had been asleep for a long time, and her elderly neighbor was waiting in the kitchen. "Good evening, Olivia." "Sorry for taking so long," Dorothea whispered. "Oh, no worries, dear. How was your day? You look completely worn out." "Unfortunately, not at all, as I would have liked. I found out something important, and now I need to make an important decision that will affect a lot," Dorothea evasively replied. "You speak in riddles somehow," the neighbor looked at her suspiciously. "I'm sorry, I can't tell you right now." "Oh, come on, I don't insist. At what time should I come tomorrow, Dorothea?" "As usual?" Tomorrow, I'll take the boys to kindergarten in the morning. We've agreed. And you need some rest. Lately, you've been spending almost all your time with them. The woman smiled in response. All right, then I'll pick them up from the kindergarten and stay with them afterwards. If anything changes, give me a call, sweetheart. Thank you so much. I can't imagine what I would do without you. Oh, stop it. You know, it brings me joy. Closing the door behind her neighbor, Dorothea sat in the kitchen for another half hour, deeply immersed in thought. Despite promising herself to leave the decision for tomorrow, she couldn't shake off these thoughts. Finally, feeling extremely drowsy, she didn't resist it. Quickly taking a shower, she went to bed, hoping to have some clarity in her mind tomorrow morning. In the morning, Dorothea woke up to the alarm clock, her head pounding. She had slept terribly, tossing and turning all night, nightmares haunting her. Dorothea got up in a shattered state and was even more bewildered than the day before. Now everything that had happened the previous evening seemed unreal, like a bad dream. She mechanically went about her motherly duties, talking to her children and getting ready for work, but she was not present. Her thoughts were far from reality. All her mental activity was focused on finding the right solution. Dorothea snapped out of it when the doorbell rang. Out of fear, she dropped the cup from her hands, and it instantly shattered on the floor. Who could it be? "It's so early," flashed through her mind immediately. Naturally, the most horrible thoughts crossed her mind, that they noticed her presence during yesterday's conversation. Shivers ran down her spine. She hesitated and moved towards the front door. Only when she saw her neighbor through the peephole could Dorothea finally exhale. "Good morning." "Sorry for coming so early," the elderly lady said, entering the apartment and closing the door behind her. "I just felt like you weren't yourself yesterday. Look, it's even worse today. Sweetheart, did you at least get some sleep?" "I did a little," Dorothea forced a smile. "Don't you want to say something to me?" "I don't know what happened, but something serious happened. Do you at least want to talk?" "Unfortunately, I can't tell you right now. It's just tormenting me about the choice I have to make, nothing more." "Don't worry, I'll handle it." "Sweetie, my advice to you is timeless and independent of the situation. Act according to your conscience. I know you will. If you act differently, you'll simply torment yourself later." "Yes, perhaps you're right." They sat down with the children and Olivia. Everyone had breakfast. Dorothea, however, didn't feel like eating. She struggled and considered various options, but the more she thought, the more convinced she became that the wise old lady was right. Regardless of the fear and circumstances, Dorothea simply wouldn't forgive herself if something happened to Rogelio, and she didn't even try to warn him. When the woman went outside with her sons to take them to kindergarten and head to work herself, she had already made the decision. Always act conscientiously. How else will I live with myself later? No, agreed, the woman concluded. The decision was finally and irrevocably made. Despite Dorothea's determination, she felt a bit subdued by fear as she approached the hospital. How do I tell everything to Rogelio? Will he believe me? She had an internal dialogue with herself. Oh, damn it. How's it going? Do what you must, and let it be what it will be. With this mindset, Dorothea entered the room to see her patient. Hello, Rogelio. Oh, Dorothea, good day. You're a bit late today. Usually, by the time I wake up, you're already here, the man asked without any reproach. I was taking my little ones to the daycare today, the nurse replied thoughtfully. Dorothea, what's wrong with you? You seem very sad and thoughtful. Did something happen? Rogelio became wary. To be honest, yes. We need to talk seriously, the woman decisively began the conversation. You're scaring me. Dorothea approached the door of the ward, checked that no one was outside, closed the door tightly behind her, and, lowering her voice, began her story. She carefully and thoroughly recounted the events of the previous evening to Rogelio, retelling every phrase uttered by the head physician and Susanna. Finishing her narrative, she anxiously looked at the man. He remained silent. Throughout her story, he was closely observing her and her facial expressions, but he never interrupted or asked any questions. Dorota was very afraid of his reaction and whether he would believe her. Rogelio's face was like an impenetrable mask. It was unclear what he was feeling and thinking at that moment. After outlining the plan agreed upon by Rogelio's wife and Leoncio, Dorota fell silent. She gazed attentively at her patient, waiting for his reaction. Inside, she was scared. "Thank you for telling me, Dorota," Rogelio finally spoke in a quiet and steady voice. "I admit, I'm not the least bit surprised. I was aware of all this, except for the new plan, of course." "How? You knew, and yet you calmly communicated with your wife?" Dorota couldn't contain her emotions, they simply overwhelmed her. She faltered under the man's intense gaze. "My God, please forgive me. It's none of my business. I'm sorry." "No, why? What's there to apologize for? Perhaps you're right. I remain neutral but will take no action for now. After you told me, you shared. I understand how difficult it must have been for you. I'm sure you spent the whole night contemplating whether to intervene. In connection with that, and considering your kindness towards me, I consider it my duty to tell you everything as it is, as far as I know. I might have fibbed a bit when I said you didn't tell me anything new. Knowing and suspecting are entirely different, unquestionably. I suspected that my wife, Susanna, was responsible for the attack on me. There were reasons for that." "Sorry for interrupting, Rogelio," Dorota interjected. "I can see that talking about this and what happened is very unpleasant for you. I just want to emphasize that I don't think you owe me anything to say or explain." "Who am I?" "It's funny," she said with a forced, sad smile. "Right now, you are one of the closest people to me," the patient said seriously. Dorota felt the blood rush to her face. She was blushing. "I wouldn't deliberately involve you in this story, but since it happened against all odds if you've become an inadvertent witness to a secret conversation. Well, now I would like to tell you everything from the beginning to the end if you don't mind. What you did today. It's phenomenal how you acted. Now I trust you unconditionally. I want to know your opinion, if you don't mind." Rogelio paused. He awaited a reaction from the woman across from him, her principled agreement. She, however, lost the power of speech from everything that had started happening. For Dorota, all of this was completely unexpected. She rather expected to be accused of all mortal sins, to be driven out with disgrace, to be scolded but not praised, and not to be treated even more respectfully. "Of course, Rogelio, I want to know if it's okay for you," the nurse forced herself to say. Rogelio smiled meaningfully and began his story. "A few weeks before the murder attempt, I found out that my wife was cheating on me. It turned out that her affair had been going on for quite some time, at least judging by the duration of the correspondence that I accidentally read. Perhaps I am to blame for starting to pay less attention to and care for Susanna, but she knew who she was marrying. She knew that my work took first place for me. Furthermore, she never made any concessions herself. When we got married, we both dreamed of having children. Susanna knew that I wanted children very much, but the beautiful, comfortable life quickly entranced her and blinded her. In the 6th year of our marriage, I constantly heard excuses for why it was not the right time to have children. Let's wait a little longer. I want to live for myself and so on. Understand, I get it all, and I never pressured anyone. She just knew that I passionately wanted to become a father. She knew that the refusal of my first wife to have children became a key factor in our final divorce. It turned out that Susanna deceived me. It was sad for me to realize. Forgive me for the pun. My wife wants me dead, and here I am grieving and lamenting that she deceived me." Rogelio sighed deeply. Dorota felt infinitely sorry for the person in front of her. He was very lonely and unhappy. Sorry for the lyrical digression, the businessman coughed and continued his story. In general, our relationship had truly run its course by this point. I began to understand that Susanna and I are completely different people. We have different priorities and goals in life. On top of everything, there's this cursed correspondence. The devil led me. Why did I peek at her phone when I heard the notification sound? I don't know. Betrayal, for me, is treachery. I couldn't forgive anyone for that. Probably many people feel the same way. My decision was simple. I wanted to quietly and peacefully divorce Susanna. Rogelio clearly pondered after uttering the last sentence. You told Susanna that you knew everything? Dorota couldn't restrain her curiosity. What? Rogelio snapped out of his thoughts. No, of course not. I hate quarrels, disputes, and scandals. What's the point? What would it change now and could have changed? No, I just instructed my lawyer to start the divorce preparation process. It's not as simple as it seems. Susanna and I had a prenuptial agreement. We needed to gather a bunch of documents and prepare thoroughly. I generally don't like spontaneous activities. If I can lay the straw, I try to do it. A few days before the attack, I turned to my lawyer. Before that, I tried to come to terms with everything on my own. It was unbearably difficult to talk about what happened. Excuse me for prying. So, do you think someone informed your wife that you were planning to divorce her? Consequently, she decided to act to avoid losing the money and other assets acquired during your marriage. Dorota tried to put together a complete picture of everything that had happened in her mind. Since she involuntarily got involved in this story, she wanted to have open eyes on everything that was happening. Yes, that's exactly what I think, Rogelio sadly confirmed. To be more precise, I even know who this person is. I only talked to my lawyer about the divorce process. Accordingly, I believe he spilled the beans about everything. It seems very reasonable, the nurse said thoughtfully, trying to piece together the full puzzle in her mind. Excuse me, Rogelio. I understand that I'm terribly out of line and meddling in something that's not my business, but do you know who this is? Who's your wife's lover? You're very delicate, Dorota, but I'm already telling you everything. There is no need to apologize or mince words. No, I don't know. In the chat, he called himself anything but his name. Does it really matter? Since you let me, I'll ask one more question. Dorota felt a certain personal involvement in all of Rogelio's troubles. What do you plan to do now with all of this? Especially considering what I told you about the conspiracy between the chief doctor and Susanna. You mean their plan to kill me during the operation? The patient chuckled. The question was clearly rhetorical, but just in case, Dorota nodded in response. I don't know what to do about this. I'll probably ask you to be my personal Cerberus. First, we need to control the administration of the necessary medications. Do you understand this well? I studied to be a medical nurse in college, though I didn't finish. Then I went on maternity leave and never returned to study. But, of course, I remember a lot, and here I have to figure things out on my own sometimes. I didn't want to take on colossal responsibility, but I can look at the ampoules and nod to you. It's important not to cancel the antibiotics, though, because after the surgery you had, they are necessary. Sepsis or not, complications are inevitable. Good. I think that's enough for today, and we'll figure out the rest later, Rogelio nodded. And what about the rest? What to do about the rest? With your wife, her collusion with the chief doctor, and the murder that has already happened, the woman couldn't contain herself. Since her curiosity was only encouraged, she saw no reason to stop. Right now, a very close friend of mine, a comrade, is dealing with all of this. Don't worry, Rogelio reassured the nurse, as if trying to calm her down. I'm bothered by how calm you are, to be honest. I almost went insane overnight and in the morning, and you're so calm, as if it doesn't concern you at all, although the culprits have already unequivocally demonstrated their intentions to you. Dorota had decided to be completely frank and say everything she thought. It seemed to her that the time for politeness had long since passed. The life of a good person was at stake, and he seemed not to understand this, even though the conspirators had already unequivocally demonstrated their intentions to him. You're just very young, Dorothea, and that's why it's so bitter for you. I act with a cooler head and more rationally. What can I, specifically, do now? Nothing. If I freak out and get nervous, it will only worsen my already questionable health. Isn't that right? The patient reasoned with a touch of almost fatherly warmth and kindness. Well, yes, it's true, but being so calm. My anxiety and stress won't help the situation, he summed up his position. Okay. I'm sorry for my persistence, but how confident are you in that acquaintance, on whose shoulders your fate and your life are now entrusted? Can he be trusted? Are you sure? The nurse understood perfectly well that she had no right to ask such questions, but Rogelio himself indicated that she could cross the line and meddle in something that was not her business. No, I'm not sure. Well, you're not sure. So, it turns out that you definitely know there is a traitor. Perhaps not just one, right? This is a fact. You should think about whoever this person is, please. Even if it's just you alone, with yourself, maybe it's not worth blindly trusting one person in your situation. It's very dangerous. I don't want to touch on sore spots, but you married Susanna and probably trusted her. I don't want to say that I'm a big expert and understand people. My husband turned out to be a real monster, and I couldn't see it. That's why, as a fellow, sorry fool, I advise you the same. Think it over well. I greatly appreciate your opinion, Dorothea, really. But believe me, this person, we've been together since our youth. If I can trust anyone in this situation, it's only him, Rogelio answered calmly enough. The woman expected a much more expressive reaction in response to her not very permissible and appropriate passage. I hope so, the nurse replied, more to herself. She started feeling streeful even more. They spent the rest of the day calmly, avoiding further discussion of the topic that traumatized and greatly annoyed both of them. They strolled, the nurse read a book aloud, and they even chatted about some unrelated topics. When the nurse came in, Dorothea usually left the room. However, this time, she closely observed all the procedures, literally hanging over the nurse's shoulder. Nothing suspicious has happened yet, but that didn't offer much comfort. It meant there was still more to come. Dorothea didn't know how her patient felt, he gave no indication. However, internally, she couldn't find peace. She was tense to the point where she sometimes felt the approach of a panic attack, barely managing to keep herself breathing steadily and not succumb to hysterics. She understood that she was now deeply involved in this story. Earlier, she was just a caretaker who knew and understood nothing, but last night's events and her subsequent actions changed everything. Moreover, Rogelio himself had chosen her as the person he trusted, disclosing the full story. Dorothea was not prepared at all to take on such a huge responsibility. She literally felt that Rogelio and his life were under her protection. She had to monitor the medical staff, knew all the intricacies, and was initiated into the details. Nobody asked her if she wanted this or if she was ready for such a serious burden. It happened against Dorothea's will, probably even against Rogelio's will. He didn't intend to burden her with his problems, it seemed, but fate decreed otherwise. She got deeply involved in other people's problems. It horrified and scared her. One could consider the woman paranoid, but now she feared most of all how Rogelio was behaving. Of course, she didn't know the person he entrusted with solving all the issues. Maybe this person was indeed a golden man, the finest in the world. But what if not? Nobody, except Rogelio, Dorothea, and the chosen person, was privy to all the details. What would happen if this trusted person turned out to be a traitor? Rogelio and Dorothea would be killed, and that's it. The wealthy widow would be happy, everyone would benefit, except for the nurse and the businessman, of course, and Dorothea's sons, undoubtedly, who would be left orphans. No, I can't risk it. Rogelio is risking himself. He's an adult and has the right to do so. I don't have that right, I have children. I am responsible for them, Dorotea finally decided. She wanted to play it safe. She believed in Rogelio, but why should she trust the person he trusted? The woman had almost reached her home when she decided to turn around and go all in. She headed towards Herminio, her former classmate. Back in school, they had a platonic childhood romance. Now, like Dorotea, the man was divorced and lived alone, so she wasn't afraid to show up at his doorstep late in the evening. It wasn't certain that he would be home. Sometimes he didn't return from work for days. By the way, the choice of Herminio was not accidental or driven by sentimental feelings. The man had transferred to the same department a little over a year ago. If anyone could help, it would be him, and Dorotea had no doubts about his reliability. The third factor was that she could put pressure on Herminio. She wasn't foolish and understood that nobody willingly wanted to get involved in this matter. It was too bad, and the opponent had too many resources and money. But Herminio owed Dorotea. Once determined to act, this stubborn woman couldn't be dissuaded anymore. She rushed forward like a tank, blind to obstacles. She was fortunate. The lights were on in her friend's apartment windows, so she hadn't come in vain. Herminio opened the door almost immediately. "Oh, hello. What are you doing here?" he exclaimed, surprised to see his old acquaintance at the doorstep. "Hello. It's an important matter. Can I come in?" "Sure, go to the kitchen. I just got back, and I'm cooking dumplings. Would you like some?" "No, thanks. Who cared about dumplings?" Stress had a lump in the woman's throat. "Now, tell me, why did you come at such a late hour without a call?" Dorotea didn't have to repeat herself twice. She began the story from the very beginning, from the day Rogelio arrived at the hospital as an unknown patient. Providing all the details, she concluded with a recount of their conversation today. "And why do I need all this information?" Herminio cynically asked, finishing the last dumpling. "I want to ask you for help." "Help with what, Dorotea?" "He told you he has someone there he trusts." "Herminio, don't be an idiot. Put aside your professional qualities, please." "It's me. I don't trust that person. Rogelio's life is at stake. He can dispose of it as he pleases. But what about me? Who will take care of me and my children?" "I am not ready for such a risk," Dorotea exclaimed, irritated by her friend's apathy. "Why is it about you? Don't make a fool out of me, I've already asked." "You're not a fool, and you understand that Rogelio has probably called his trusted person and told him about the conversation with the chief doctor and his wife, which I said. So, in any case, I'm an unnecessary witness." "Well, that makes sense. It's probably fair reasoning, but I hope Rogelio wasn't foolish enough to reveal how he found out about the conspiracy. And what if he indeed blindly trusts this person and discloses it?" Dorotea countered, raising an eyebrow, awaiting a response. "Dorotea, honestly, I don't want to get involved in this. There's so much money involved, so much at stake for these people, you can't avoid problems." Essentially, this was what she expected. "Do you have a conscience, dear Herminio? You introduced me to my dearest husband. You sang in my ears what a wonderful guy he was and what a perfect couple we made. Of course, I should have had brains and eyes myself, but you're also to blame for it. You could have honestly told me what a jerk David was. You knew everything. You knew about how he treated his ex. You could have told me you didn't. On the contrary, you defended your friend to the last. And what am I to you, Herminio? How would you feel if my kids ended up in an orphanage after my untimely demise?" Dorotea had known Herminio since childhood and knew where to apply pressure. Over the years in law enforcement agencies, he has certainly changed a lot, acquiring numerous unsavory traits. Professional deformation made itself felt. But she knew Herminio's sensitive points from childhood. After finishing her tirade, she looked attentively into her friend's eyes, trying to discern whether her words had hit home this time. Dorotea understood that manipulating people and their feelings was terrible, but there was no time for niceties and decency now. Too much was at stake. Perhaps, for herself, she wouldn't have taken such a step, but for her boys, for them, she was ready for anything. Fear for their future choked her and held her captive. "Okay," Herminio finally said. "Although you're being unfair, these are all forbidden tactics. You shouldn't do this. You've cornered me. When you have kids, you'll understand. You'd do anything for them," the woman replied with an ironic tone. "I suppose that's fair, and the accusations against me regarding David are also relevant. But what exactly do you want from me? What kind of help are you expecting? I want to know who Susanna's mysterious lover is. Rogelio didn't tell me the name of his trusted person, as you understood. But if Susanna's lover is someone close to Rogelio, I think you've caught the connection without me. I got it. And what are you going to do about it? Depending on what you dig up, of course. If it's just her fitness instructor or whoever usually frequents the circles of her ladies, then I'll think further. Right now, I want to know for sure who he is, and then I'll decide." "All right, but it will take a few days. Don't expect results in a few hours." "Yes, I'll wait." "Just don't let me down, Herminio, please," Dorotea said with difficulty. She became so emotional that tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't want to press further and remind him of what would happen if he made a mistake or delayed too much. She hoped that despite everything, deep inside, the man still harbored the kind, good guy she had once been in love with. Recalling that night was terrifying for Dorotea. 24 hours ago, it seemed that things couldn't get any worse for her. But, of course, one shouldn't speak or think like that, or fate would compete to demonstrate all its capabilities. The following days were a waking nightmare. She spent the whole day with Rogelio, trying not to show him her emotions or her fear. She was constantly on guard. She needed to ensure that the patient's treatment continued and that the chief doctor had not yet implemented his plan. In the evenings and nights, Dorotea was afraid for herself and her children. It was a real hell. There was no time to breathe freely. She had to control herself constantly and show no extra emotions to anyone. She cried at night, and in the morning, she tried to smile at her boys and Olivia, who, of course, noticed the changes in the woman's behavior. The old lady even tried to ask some questions, but Dorotea just waved her off and joked, saying that she looked bad just from fatigue and had nothing to worry about. It seemed like the neighbor was pretending to believe only out of respect, and Dorotea was in hell. She had no one to share her fears and anxieties with. She kept all her emotions to herself, making it even harder. On the third day after the conversation with Herminio, the phone finally rang. Her friend called late in the evening when the nurse was about to leave the hospital and go home. "Hello," she answered immediately, nervously. "Dorotea, hey. Are you still at the hospital?" "Yes, what's up?" "Listen, can you somehow sneak me in to see Rogelio? But it has to be discreet." Well, she pondered how to accomplish this. "Yes, I can." "Then tell me where to meet. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Dorotea gave Herminio precise instructions and hung up. Rogelio looked at her with surprise, questioning. He had heard what she said on the phone and the entire message she delivered. "All right, please don't worry. I'm bringing someone here now. He's a very reliable and good person. He agreed to help us." "Well, me. Now he asked to talk to you personally. Please, it's very important." Dorotea looked at her patient with a pleading gaze. "Okay, we'll talk later, but for now, lead your friend. Let's hear what he has to say." Just a few days ago, the woman thought that nothing would make her return to the dark staircase. However, as already mentioned, fate had a cruel sense of humor. Overcoming her fear, the woman slipped down to the exit. Dorotea met Herminio in an area where she was certain there were no surveillance cameras and led him inside, to Rogelio's room, through indirect paths. The nurse slipped in first, made sure there was no one in the corridor, and motioned for Herminio, as if to say the coast was clear. Within a minute, they were in the room, closing the door behind them. "Rogelio, this is Herminio, my friend," the nurse introduced him. "Good evening, nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand to the businessman. "Sorry for the intrusion, but I'll explain everything now." "Hello." "Yes, I would like to hear the explanations." Dorotea realized that she needed to somehow smooth the situation. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't just leave everything as it was. In the evening, after our candid conversation, I had to go to Herminio and ask for his help. I told him everything," the woman admitted, bowing her head. "Dorotea, but why?" "I told you I had already taken measures," the businessman began. "Excuse me, I have to interrupt you," Herminio said. Dorotea acted very wisely and insightfully. "You shouldn't be shouting and getting indignant, but thanking her." "Hold on, I'll explain everything now." He immediately halted any additional questions and inquiries. "Rogelio, am I correct in understanding that your trusted person is Salvador Flores, your college friend and deputy?" "Yes, how did you?" The patient was surprised by the outsider's knowledge. "Oh, right." Herminio pulled out his ID from his pocket and showed it. "Now I think it's clear why I know some information. So, it's Salvador who organized the attack on you in the park." "What?" Rogelio exclaimed. Dorotea was seriously frightened. She had never seen the man in such a state before. His face instantly flared with rage. As difficult as it might be to believe, the rat is Salvador. He is also, by the way, the baby, bunny, and other diminutive adjectives in your wife's messages. He is her lover. "I just don't believe you." "This can't be true," Rogelio stated. "Fair enough. Here, please take a look." Herminio opened the folder he had in his hands, took out a file, and handed it to Rogelio. Dorotea stood next to the patient's bed and could clearly see explicit photos featuring Susanna and an unfamiliar man, presumably Salvador. The pictures varied, capturing the couple not only in more intimate settings, but also in restaurants and on the street. Their physical contact left no room for imagination. The nature of the relationship between the man and the woman in the photos was extremely close, beyond any doubt. "Where did you get this?" Rogelio asked, almost stuttering, as he scrolled through a dozen shots. As I said, Dorotea proved to be insightful and asked to find out who hides behind the mask of your wife's mysterious lover. She immediately said that if it's someone from your closest circle, then most likely he is the traitor. And that's how it turned out. "How did you find out that it's Salvador?" Rogelio tremulously asked. Now it was as easy as 2 + 2. They had no one to hide from, and the couple stopped hiding their relationship. "They've already written you off." "Oh, sorry," Herminio apologized for his audacity. "It's okay. This is what I deserve, if not worse. It's inconceivable how much of a fool I've been." Rogelio lamented. "Dorotea, forgive me. I almost swore to you that I knew whom to trust. I thought we were completely safe and that Salvador simply couldn't betray me. Unfortunately, it's always like this, Rogelio. Don't blame yourself. Every day at work, I encounter situations where grown, smart, and sensible people repeat the words you're saying now. Betrayal always comes from one's own, never from strangers." "Yes, I understand." Cynical, but very accurate. Rogelio had been sleeping with his face down since the beginning of this conversation. He was clearly in shock, not expecting such a blow. Rogelio had already endured his wife's betrayal, but the betrayal of his best and closest friend. It was very difficult to come to terms with that. "How about you?" Dorotea asked with sympathy, placing her hand on the patient's shoulder. She felt terribly sorry for him. She really didn't want it to turn out this way. She felt genuinely sorry. "Like a dump truck ran over me, Dorotea. And not just once, but 10 times in a row." The businessman even found the strength to raise his eyes to her and forced a smile, strained and through sheer effort. "Okay," Herminio, what's next? Is there anything else we need to know? The woman turned to her friend. There's an interesting nuance. You were sure that the traitor was the lawyer, right? Because you only told him about the divorce and asked him to prepare the papers. That makes sense, the caretaker defended her ward. Very logical, I don't deny that. But Salvador equipped your office with a camera and a recording device. They wanted to keep you under control, so the lawyer is actually claiming Herminio dumped another avalanche of information on them. This is a nightmare. Dorotea couldn't hold back. Why? Rogelio asked. Well, apparently, because your wife was preparing to become your widow and successor. Her companion was planning to take your chair and run the company. To do that, they needed to know all aspects and nuances of how you conduct business and with whom. Is that for sure? Yes, don't doubt it. I won't go into unnecessary details right now, but later I'll be able to confirm all my words with facts. For now, I brought only the pictures. I was sure you wouldn't believe me outright. I wouldn't believe it myself at your place. Okay. And now what? What should I do next? Rogelio asked the main question. Oh, nothing now. I came to tell you everything and warn you. I need Dorotea. Me? Why? The woman was surprised. I need you to write a statement reporting an imminent crime, specifically when you became an accidental witness to a criminal conspiracy involving the chief doctor and Susana Blanco. I don't understand. I need to cover my tracks, Dorotea. Will they be arrested soon? Rogelio guessed. Yes, everything is ready. Early tomorrow morning, Salvador, your wife, the chief doctor, and the accomplices will be arrested simultaneously. We have all the evidence, facts, and the entire plan. The only thing missing is the reason for our intervention. Thanks to the statement that Dorotea will write, which I'm sure she will, Herminio emphasized with determination, we will have a basis to intervene. I'm already writing. In free form? To whom? He didn't need to tell that to her twice. She was ready to write whatever was necessary. Herminio left after about an hour. Dorotea accompanied him, ensuring that his presence in the hospital and the conversation with Rogelio remained their little secret. On her way out, the caretaker also called Olivia and asked her to stay overnight and not open the door for anyone, just in case. After making sure the old woman understood the instructions and would follow them to the letter, Dorotea returned to the room. How are you, Rogelio? She asked first. Thank you, Dorotea. It's terrible, but I'm sure it will pass, the man said quietly. You can't even imagine how grateful I am to both your friend Herminio and you. I still can't come to terms with my own stubbornness and stupidity. How could this happen? All before my eyes. Herminio is absolutely right. I believe that you shouldn't blame yourself for being an honest person. You have close people whom you love and protect, and you can't imagine that they are capable of such meanness and betrayal, Dorotea comforted him. She genuinely believed that. She knew from her own experience that she was just as deceived and foolish as Rogelio. She, too, believed in a close person and a beloved husband. Is there any blame for being deceived? In her view, no. The blame always lies with the traitors. Thank you for your sympathy and support. Are you planning to leave? No, I already called my neighbor and asked her to stay at my place, spend time with the boys, and, of course, be careful and vigilant, just in case. Excellent. I couldn't imagine being alone now, left alone with all these thoughts. You're amazing. How you managed everything and found a way while I was a stubborn blockhead, I'm impressed, Dorotea. You can't imagine what it cost me. It was so frightening and dreadful. I couldn't sleep at home, I suffered, and then I tried to hold myself together in your presence, the woman smiled. You're a huge hero. Thank you so much. Rogelio couldn't stop expressing his gratitude to the caretaker. He was extremely impressed with her courage and wisdom. Then everything happened, just as Herminio had said. All the culprits were arrested early in the morning. By the beginning of the working day, the chief doctor, Leoncio, had been detained. Dorotea and Rogelio rejoiced like children. A few hours later, investigators came to them. The investigator came to get the victim's explanations and interview the complainant. Although everything was already clear without them, these were formalities. Herminio called around noon and brought even more good news. It turned out that under pressure, Salvador started shifting the blame onto Susana, and she in turn blamed him. Such is their love. They found each other. For several weeks, there was a constant stir. The case was high profile, so there was a lot of noise around. Dorotea was tired of all this, especially the increased attention to her modest person. She and Beketov tried to maintain their previous pace of life to minimize stress and actively restore the patient's health. It didn't always work, but they actively tried. A little over a month later, the attending physician concluded that Rogelio could continue treatment at home. Fortunately, his body responded well to treatment. The patient limped heavily, but he could now stand and move with difficulty on his own, using a cane. Rogelio actively invited Dorotea to his place, but she refused to leave the hospital. Dorotea had suffered a lot over the past few months. Such stress did not suit her at all. Strangely enough, Dorotea liked her job. She loved it. She loved helping people. Perhaps she could have accepted Rogelio's offer for financial reasons. The meager salary of a caretaker was certainly not enough. But when he generously thanked her upon discharge, Dorotea understood that the issue of money and their shortage would not bother her for a long time. She knew that many colleagues and nurses behind her back were wagging their fingers, but she didn't care about others' opinions. Dorotea wanted to continue her education and become a doctor. That was her dream, not money. The money was just an opportunity. After Rogelio's discharge, Dorotea quickly realized that she missed him. She missed his company and his wisdom. As it turned out, Rogelio also quickly realized that he couldn't be without his beloved caretaker. One day, Dorotea returned home after her shift and saw a man's coat and shoes in the hallway. At first, the thought crossed her mind that her ex-husband had shown up, but she quickly dismissed this idea. Peeking into the children's room, she saw Rogelio sitting on the floor with her little boys, playing with toy cars. "Hello," the woman exclaimed. "Mama, Mama." The kids rushed towards her. "Good afternoon, Dorotea. I hope you don't mind. I came uninvited, and Olivia kindly let me in," Rogelio explained. "How can you not let in such a gallant gentleman?" The old lady chuckled, emerging from the kitchen and winking at Dorotea. "He came with flowers, even for me. Can you imagine?" The children also started showing off the gifts Rogelio brought them, competing with each other. "You'll spoil them," Dorotea said with a smile. "Nothing at all. Children should not be spoiled." "Well, shall we have coffee?" Rogelio brought a cake. The neighbor invited everyone to the table. They were sitting at the table together, and it created the image of complete harmony, as if it had always been this way, as if they were truly one family. Dorotea hadn't seen the boys so happy in a long time. They were overjoyed by the rare visits of any men. They missed having a father and male attention. Dorotea marveled at how lovingly Rogelio looked at them and how attentively he listened. After dinner, Olivia, acting like a well-bred lady, decided to leave the couple alone. She took the boys with her to put them to bed. Left alone, Rogelio and Dorotea didn't know what to say to each other. "Dorotea, I've realized that I can't live without you anymore," Rogelio addressed her. "You know, Rogelio, I caught myself feeling the same way," Dorotea said quietly, placing her hand on his. Now they both really want to believe and hope that things will finally work out for them and that everything will be fine. The two people who have been traumatized by betrayal might finally find a quiet and peaceful haven next to each other. They have been fighting for their happiness for so long that it seems they deserve it more than anyone else.
If you're enjoying it as well, Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.